Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing great. How about yourself, Mark?
Great. How are you?
Pretty good. It's interesting. I've done a bunch of these podcasts, and typically I'm talking to people on the other side of the planet or the other side of the country. And not only I think that we're all in the same time zone, we're actually in the same kind of metropolitan area. You're all in the Northwest, right?
Actually, I migrated during COVID. I was in Seattle for about 10 years. I actually live in Montana now. So after COVID hit, girlfriend and I moved in together. And I'm like, hey, let's get out of downtown Seattle and kind of migrated east, to say the least.
And how's life in Montana?
A lot simpler than Seattle. No, it's quiet. It's affordable. I have some family close by, so all is positive. But honestly, the mountain biking's great. Snowboarding's great. If you're a big fisher or hunter, there's lots of activities, so I can't complain.
And now you're just showing off, man. I was just one more thing on the Montana thing. I'm wondering, like, how many people you meet who are not from Montana, and when you're traveling and you say you're from Montana, they're like, "Oh, I've seen Yellowstone."
It's so funny. So I grew up here and never thought I'd be moving back. But since I've moved back to Montana, most of the folks that I meet out of state, I'm like, "How'd you learn about Montana?" To your point, and they're like, "Oh, there's a show called Yellowstone during COVID. We're binging it." I'm like, "Okay, so you live in like Bozeman, Missoula area, and yeah, it's a common theme."
That's funny. And Adam, where are you based?
I'm Seattle based.
Seattle.
And love the Northwest, love Seattle, and great to be here on the show with you and Kincaid. And I'm particularly excited to thread the topic of our discussion on LLMs and localization that we had in a panel talk recently.
Yeah.
So this is a great hub and center for these kinds of discussions, and I'm grateful for memoQ for hosting this.
Well, thank you for that. And so maybe, we're definitely going to do kind of a deep dive in terms of large language models or LLMs in the local industry. But maybe before we do that, we can take a step back. If you wouldn't mind, Kincaid, could you kind of introduce yourself, your role in your organization, and how all that ties in with AI, and do that like in the elevator pitch kind of mode?
Yeah, totally. So Kincaid Day, nice to meet everybody. Thanks for listening in. Recently joined Centific, the company I work at now, about 4 months ago. Originally worked for the company about 10 years ago when it was called Pactera, biz dev in the localization space. Now my role, I'm the director of AI-enabled localization, where I focus on a couple different pillars of the business, specifically around AI and data services and localization and how we can build products and build solutions for our customers.
Thank you for that. And it already kind of cues up a question in my mind, but I'm going to let Adam introduce himself first, and then I'm going to come back at you right away.
Sounds good.
My name is Adam Vance, VP of Localization and Localization QA for GlobalStep. We're a multimedia and interactive services company. We do localization QA, functional QA, customer support, and art development as well, mostly for the games and e-learning sectors, as well as VR, and extending into software, website application, and mobile development.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that. And now, Kincaid, I want to come back to you both actually with this question, because you mentioned servicing your customers by providing these like AI or LLM solutions. And my question is, do customers really care about the technology? Like, hey, we want to have AI or LLM enabled technology, or do they just want the service? Do they just want the outcome? Because I want the stuff translated. I don't care how you do it, and I want to translate it in the appropriate manner. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in first here. And just to add a little bit about Centific. So it's 25-year-old company. And we've been in the localization space since the beginning, and our AI and data practice is over 10 years old. So I might have a bit of a biased response just simply due to the nature of our business. So we've actually been building LLMs and AI for quite some time, meaning we're working with some of the commercial LLM providers in the space, as well as customers building out MT solutions, et cetera. So I'm going to have a mixed response in the sense, yes, some customers absolutely care about the solution because they're looking to productize the tools that they've been building over the past 10 years, and then leveraging that for localization solutions. But however, on the other side of the house, where maybe these folks don't have an AI division or data science division, and they have a specific need around localization, such as, hey, our budget's getting cut in half, we need to do more with less. The common theme I'm sure the three of us are hearing, they don't care how we do it. They just want to know that we can do it, and they want to understand that how we're sourcing data, how we're leveraging their data is not going to go to one of their competitors or potentially into a commercial model. So really the short of it, I think from a localization perspective, it's truly outcome-based versus tool-based. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I'm going to let Adam jump in a second, but I will come back to you later and ask for some specific examples for that first group of customers, because I think that's really interesting. But Adam, please jump in.
Yeah, so GlobalStep is also responding to market demand for LLM-based services, and we're responding to that in a variety of ways. But what we're observing in general is that LLMs are quickly becoming a central tool in many companies for many different functions, and the machine translation feature is catching some attention in that context. So from that standpoint, we're actually getting a lot of inquiries and a lot of interest, and we ourselves are experimenting. I should say our background is that we work mostly in multimedia and games, a completely different domain from Centific, and the accessibility or applicability or use cases of LLMs in games and in many areas are very domain specific and related to the source content. So in that context, we've been looking at how to integrate LLMs in the localization process or CAT tool, translation management system, either through plugins or hubs, but also natively within the LLMs. And at this time, it doesn't seem like the process for connecting LLMs to CAT tools is entirely figured out, let's just say, or the feature sets have not yet stabilized because these have recently appeared in the last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
So that's leading us to do a lot of comparisons between using standalone LLMs as well as LLMs integrated in a CAT tool environment. And we are primarily interested in what are the limitations and advantages of each use case scenario in that context.
Interesting. Yeah, I just at Local, I mean, I guess you wouldn't be surprised, but I was surprised that how many of the conversations were on that specific topic, and where can you insert LLMs or AI into the workflow? The obvious one is on the place that MT used to be, that is now being displaced. But there are many other areas in the workflow where AI or LLMs can help to boost productivity. But I digress. Before we start to go down the rabbit hole, could one of you jump in and kind of clarify or explain the difference between AI and large language models? Because I kind of use them interchangeably up until recently. Now I'm starting to become very much aware that they are not always A equals A. They're slightly different. One of you want to take that?
You have a preference? Adam, do you want to go first? Or me? Yeah. No, fair enough. So AI, generally speaking, I think encompasses multiple models or use cases, right? So for instance, like LLMs is a very specific use case where we take a corpus of data, billions of parameters, to allow a model to analyze and understand and then produce text. So based on a model receiving a question from us as a human via prompt, it will analyze that data statistically, look for patterns, and then generate responses, right? But now let's think about like computer vision. It's also trained on a mass amount of data to solve very unique problems. But it's a different representation of AI, generally speaking, because instead of it being conversational or leveraging NLP or natural language processing, what we're actually doing is leveraging similar frameworks to process mass amounts of data to look for patterns and then to enforce learning. So say a self-driving car can identify a stop sign to make a decision or see a pedestrian to hit the brakes. And then moving right along, machine translation technically is AI as well, where that's segment-based. So it's trained on a mass amount of data, but for a very specific use case where MT looks for, say, a source input regardless of the language, and then it references an equivalent target segment that would be compared or matched to that output. And so the point being is that LLM does not represent AI as a whole. It's simply just one of the models. And, a couple of the other use cases are a representation of kind of what AI entails.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then if we talk about LLMs in the context of our industry, what are the leading providers or platforms?
I'll take the lead on a version of that question.
Okay.
That a lot of the LLM translation tools options seem to be centering around ChatGPT right now.
Okay.
So that is certainly the leading platform, although I'm sure Kincaid knows of many other competitors, perhaps more so than myself. But one aspect of ChatGPT is that its output is fairly consistently on par with some of the better neural machine translation engines, whether that's DeepL or others. What is driving, however, its centrality as an MT translation tool is not the quality of the output, which can be corrected over time. It's actually the other features that the LLM is being used for, and the coupling of translation as a feature within. So you're training an LLM on large data sets or content sets, and ChatGPT is becoming by far at this point the default, with some strong open source competitors, is my understanding.
Yeah, maybe if I could add to that. Of course, ChatGPT is the most used large language model in the space. For us, when we speak with our customers, and as I mentioned early on, a lot of our customers, seeing that they're technology providers, they do have in-house LLMs that we've been tasked with leveraging. And so our approach at Centific is, because we're a services company as well as a technology company, the way that we've been addressing this problem is by building a AI-enabled localization framework. So we're able to actually connect multiple LLMs together in order to utilize them for various use cases. But generally speaking, we try to avoid ChatGPT 4, and it's not because ChatGPT 4 or ChatGPT, generally speaking, is not suitable as a solution to our customers. But it's a very interesting conversation when you have to explain where the data is coming from. What data are you leveraging when you're providing me with the solution? How is that sourced? Is that aligned with our brand values, et cetera? And again, this is no representation that ChatGPT is doing something wrong, but there's no easy way of telling that story. And so an approach that we actually enforce is by leveraging open source models that are locally hosted, either internal at our company or internal to the customer themselves, where we actually own the data. We train those models, and then we can actually take the customer's data to reinforce the training, right, and to make it very specialized to those customers' use cases, because then none of those customers are ever at risk to have, say, data leakage. Like we saw, for example, I think it was Samsung, where there was a developer, an engineer, someone that was leveraging ChatGPT, I think to provide feedback on code or to help with something that they were developing, and come to find out it was being uploaded into that commercial model, right? So now that's available or publicly available, where that's how we're looking to avoid those situations. So again, my answer is with the nuance that the customers that we're working with have very specific needs around data and data best practices versus, say, the general use cases of leveraging out-of-the-box commercial models.
And we have a take on that as well. I think there are concerns with the training data of LLMs like ChatGPT, but I think some of the concern with that may go away with different use cases. So, for example, if you're using an LLM to do MTQE, or even to do some tasks such as adapting the voice, the tone, or the mood of text, you may not be actually using features that require the training data of IP-sensitive content. So in that context, there's a difference between generating content and validating content and use cases, and some of the implications there. A lot of the use cases that we're looking at with ChatGPT are not exclusive to ChatGPT. They could be implemented with any number of LLMs, as Centific is doing. And those can be used for QA checks across all sorts of content, whether it's sensitive content, geopolitical issues, or age rating. You can scan for this kind of content, and you're not really using the generative AI or generative content aspect of it. It's actually being used for QA checks or validation, which is different from producing content, if that makes sense.
Let me just ask a clarifying question, and definitely I'm the least technical person in this call here, so bear with me. But when you talked about the concerns that manifest themselves with the example of Samsung, that to me is it's like somebody taking something confidential and going on the web and using Google Translate and it's like, oh, now it's out there, right? Versus if you use the commercial version of Google Translate, there are confidentiality and security controls in place where they don't have access. So my understanding of ChatGPT and some of the other LLMs is when you do buy the commercial license, your data is protected. Is that the case or is that not the case?
That's accurate. And really, yeah. And so for me to take a couple steps back, like, so today, ChatGPT 4, say, allows for you to disable the functionality where they can reference your prompts or any of the generated content to be referenced as training data, right? So yeah, 100%. All these commercial models can accommodate that, and that's no longer a concern. But something to keep in mind, we started building out our solutions like over the past several years. We were one of the first early adopters of ChatGPT back in 2019, leveraging it for some of our AI services. And so when we were looking to address these problems, that's what kind of led us down the path of being able to host these models locally, because back then there wasn't a clear solution or story that we could tell or that where we could feel comfortable to actually define what's happening behind the scenes. So yes, I think all the commercial models are very suitable when it comes to solving these types of problems, and they are addressing those concerns. We just have found that the agility that we have by hosting our own model and being able to understand the data that goes into training those models when evaluating hallucinations or ensuring that, for instance, when you do red teaming to ensure that it's providing responses to prompts in an ethical or suitable way, it just allows us to provide a solution where we kind of know how it was built. We know all the data that's went into training, all the reinforcement, versus these larger models where there's so many other factors that we necessarily can't control.
Worth pointing out that the scale of implementation of LLMs, whether it's standalone APIs or subscription tools, really varies in terms of the company, the sector, and the company profile. So the kind of training data and development efforts that efficient and effective deployment LLM usage may require may not be readily at hand or may not be readily applicable enough to get a cost benefit from it. Or people may not know. So there's a lot of experimentation going on. And one thing that's happening is that the MT features of ChatGPT and other LLMs are definitely putting into play the question of what can you do with machine translation versus human translation, and they're foregrounding that. When it comes to that, we think that a human must remain in the loop as far as training MT engines and training data. So we actively engage our localization QA teams to be able to provide the data to feed training on MT and LLM. So in those areas, there is a lot of crossover between new areas of basically having a human in the loop and review, and new opportunities to train LLM engines as well as other forms of engines, as they can be used.
I want to kind of move forward with the conversation, but before we jump into specific use cases, I do want to kind of do a level set on so that we're all on the same page. And I think many of the listeners will probably already be aware of this. I'm learning it on the fly here, but maybe can we talk a little bit about when we talk about generative, what does that actually mean? Okay. Because for us at memoQ, it's a huge part of what we're doing, right? And it's, to me, it's just like the icing on the cake. But Kincaid, do you want to jump in and kind of explain your take on the generative side, and then Adam, like you to follow on with that, please.
Yeah, the generative aspects of AI, I guess simply put, the way I look at it is you're able to, take a model such as ChatGPT and you can ask it to produce something. It's generating content on your behalf. So via prompt and response, it's creating content. No different than we see with like a Midjourney. It's generative AI that's been trained on a corpus of data that you can give it a prompt to inspire the generative aspects of what it's producing. And in that case, it's an image. And then there's the generative elements of video. So it's, for me, simply put, it's taking a model, being able to engage with it with natural language processing and communication, and having the model produce something on your behalf in the form of content.
Okay, I'm gonna add something to that, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But Adam, what's your take?
So I think it's worthwhile discussing, aspects, features that would perhaps be fall under the generative AI, or also general intelligence features of LLMs. By that, I mean you can actually ask an LLM to take an action, which may not be to generate a piece of content. So it may actually be, I could ask an LLM with a prompt to and natural language input from myself and clear instructions to take an action on a file or a corpus of material. That could be a set of QA checks. It could be checking the output of different languages for correct internationalization, time, currency, and date formats, for example. In that case, what the generative AI component may be doing is not actually producing content, but it is actually taking an action, which is a feature of the general intelligence of LLMs that you don't have within a machine translation engine, as features that are hard-coded or stored procedures in a database that take actions that way. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And then I'm going to tell you my take on it, and you guys can tell me why I'm wrong, or maybe I'm hallucinating. But my take is, you have the LLM, okay? And if I want to improve the probability of a good outcome, I can not train the LLM, but I can, as part of the prompt, have it reference certain either documents or segments, and that is going to make the outcome more focused and more on target. So, for example, with our new venture, memoQ RFP, we can have the LLM take a look at specific questions that have been answered before, and it would identify those segments and put those into the prompt, because you can't put the whole document in there for, well, cost reasons and other logistical issues, lots of tokens, and there's just certain limitations. But it can go through the document, pick the segments that are the closest to the question being asked, and that will kind of prompt it to create a more on-target response. Now, that's my take. You tell me right or wrong, or are we all right somewhat? Is it a fuzzy match here? What's going on?
No, I think that's, aligned with what we're talking about. In that case, for instance, I'm assuming, and I don't know anything about the solution, but like if I were to go about like producing that, I would take historical RFIs, RFPs, I'd synthesize it down to question answer responses, leverage like a Lang chain or similar infrastructure that you could then to leverage to train these models. And then what you're looking for is similarity in the question being asked to then produce you with responses that have been historically generated by, say, humans, like on your side. And so I think that's a way of like referencing. And then there's the creative element of then having it adapt those responses based on the specific needs. And that's, I guess, for me, and I think we're all right, first and foremost. But for me, that's where my brain really goes. What it talks about, the generative aspect is adapting that based on the intent of the prompt or the question being asked in order to solve a problem or simply just fulfill the request.
Right. I guess, Kincaid, I have a question in that regard. Do you see the feature sets actually diverging from generative AI in the future within the language industry, like services industry?
I might be a crazy person when it comes to just talking about my theories of how LLMs are going to disrupt. Maybe I'll just generally answer your question, because the hot topic to what you mentioned, Mark, I saw this at Taos, in Salt Lake a week before Loquworld. Everyone's talking about, hey, best use case for LLMs right now is let's plug it into an MT. Let's have it, assess the quality of the output and determine if we need to go into post editing or not. And then we have other providers who are like, well, that's
the model front. That's the model front example.
Shout out model front. Love those guys. No, and that's something we're doing in a very similar way as well. So we have this aspect where it's like fulfilling the needs of the humans in the context of reducing our involvement in the traditional localization process. But then expanding upon this, like the generative piece of LLMs, I think is going to be one of the most impactful things to disrupt the localization industry. And this is why. We're not talking about the intent of the content being produced. Right now, we're talking about translation, taking source input and having a target equivalent in a select few languages. Okay, that's translation. what if I could go in with a prompt and I could clearly define the intent of content that I need to be produced in all languages around the world. And I can have an LLM generate content that actually eliminates the need for localization altogether. And I can simply just have a post editor or linguist come in to validate the messaging for that market, right? So for me, I think that's kind of, and this is very unique use case specifically, let's say for marketing. Obviously, this would be applicable because the ROI, the conversion, all that's measurable versus Adam to the things that you're working on. It's more of like media and experience based where this might not be as relevant. But I really think for the transactional content that we see businesses leveraging on a day to day in order to generate revenue, that the generative aspects of LLMs will be one of the most impactful disruptors. So much so.
Whoa.
Yeah. But
whereas you could actually start tracking conversions, and then obviously the conversions would feed back in and say, hey, this content or this interpretation is more on target for what we
exactly.
want. And it kind of self-trained itself.
Because then we have the reinforcement learning mechanism, the data layer, plus the human layer, because they're the ones doing the QA and the post editing, right? And then all that's going to, compound and exponentially improve the LLM over time. So now imagine being a marketing organization that has an extremely specialized bias LLM that knows your content, knows your customer base, that's been able to read every single review on your website in real time and can have all this as influence when you're going to generate content, right? Versus leveraging neural MT or MT. MT or neural MT, they don't have any context to the why. They have the context of the content coming in and the content that needs to be produced. They don't have context as, is this a mobile app? Is this a web page? How is the UI structured? What is the string length? All of that. And that's the power of LLMs and the generative aspect. So, Adam, I might have deviated from your original question, but I think the generative components of LLMs are going to be the most disruptive thing to come into the language space over the next 3 years.
I think Kincaid is hitting on a couple of really key points, and one is no doubt generative AI will be used to produce content in different languages for various reasons. The other point that Kincaid seems to be pointing to is that there's the possibility that generative AI will bypass the need for MT in
certain
that context.
Use cases, just to clarify.
However, the problem that apparently presents itself in generating target language content is the parity or this, how symmetrical the content sets are. For one thing, LLMs are not really trained on data sets for all languages. It's majority English, but we know they can be trained to be optimized in various languages. Okay, so we may get over that hurdle. However, the alignment or symmetry of content is the strength of MT in terms of being able to give it very strict rule-based activities and directional machine translation commands that will keep your corpus symmetrical, which can be important to your user base. We see this all the time in games. If content deviates from one language to another, communities now are global and they expect that consistency. So one of the challenges I foresee in Kincaid's point, which is on target, is actually the alignment of target language output from generative AI engines, which will prompt a need for a new kind of service in the language industry that we are also trying to respond to in that context. Harnessing and leveraging our translators, our testers, as well as content experts in art to be looking at all sorts of types of content that may be generated by LLMs. Does that dovetail with what you're saying, Kincaid?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to add though, right, and this is actually going to kind of like bring it down to like surface level of what's we're actually implementing today, not just a crazy idea of how I kind of predict things to be in the future, but as an example, transcreation, traditionally, just generally speaking, can be 40% more costly than localizing content. So what we did early on is we trained LLMs in specific languages or a model in specific languages, and then worked with a customer to take kind of the idea of what I mentioned. And let's see if we could disrupt the transcreation process, generally speaking. So we had the model produce, say, 3 or 4 examples per prompt, create an email, create a web page, try to achieve this goal or check the box for the customer's needs. Then another part of Centific, and I just have to call it out for the sake of the example here, is our AI and data practice, we have 1 million people on a platform that we call OneForma. These aren't just general crowd individuals. They're actually certified experts for various use cases. And this is what allowed us to kind of excel in the AI and data space. So what we did is we then found certified, say, linguists for the customer or the service that we're trying to represent within the content. We sent this content to them and we said, we want you to score the content. They have no idea that it was produced by an LLM. We said it was produced by an agency. We want you to give it a score, go through your post editing or make any changes that you would typically make, and then provide that as feedback. And we found that we're able to reduce the transcreation turnaround time and the cost by 40%. This is the cool thing. Every iteration, though, that feedback, that comes in as training data. And so these are kind of the problems that are actually really addressable today, where we're finding the generative use case to be truly disruptive, because it's allowing you, one, your speed to market's improving drastically just with that 40% turnaround time. But then imagine being an organization that can't afford transcreation. Well, now if I can save you that 40% or maybe bring it down to a similar cost of traditional LOC, they're like, absolutely, we want to do that. And so I think that's where I'm coming from, I guess, in my perspective, because I see that evolving over time and the quality of that compounding. And that's kind of what I envision as truly replacing that process entirely with the human always in the loop. To your point, Adam, they're always going to be they're going to be so valuable. And honestly, like today, imagine if you have a single linguist or language specialist that's going through and post editing or just simply doing the QA. We're actually, I think, going to need 3 to 5 individuals that are specialized in that scenario. And the reason being is because we don't want one individual to be able to influence a language or the outcome of a business because you're creating an unintentional bias. So we're actually going to have to diversify the inputs or the validation, right, of quality. And so I think that's where we actually see some security in our industry as we kind of continue this conversation.
Well, let me give you an example and just back up one step. I think that, I mean, we can all agree that we have no idea how many different shapes and forms this is all going to take over the next couple of years. But there's going to be a lot of different, I wouldn't call it a hybrid approach where you can call it human in the loop or whatever, but an example of what you're talking about there, I just came across this where if you want to get some Japanese ad copy translated, okay, if you're talking about advertising copy, it's you can't really call it translation, and it's much more nuanced, and so you need a professional copywriter, or typically, historically, that's what you would use. But you have a platform that says, you give it some parameters and say, okay, we want to go casual tone or polite tone. Our target audience is this, and AI will generate an output. Okay, that output will go to 4 experienced copywriters who will edit it. And then it goes to a community of 10,000 consumers in Japan. So it would be like, what do they call these? Like a test marketing, when they call it when they bring people together in a room and they say, hey, what do you think about this? Focus group, right? But it's a 10,000 person focus group, right? And they vote on it. And the version that gets the most votes wins. But then that goes back and trains the engine, right? And it's like, this is pretty cool, man. I mean, so you have both the technology, the large language model, you have subject matter experts, but then you also have a crowd, and so you're not displacing people; you're actually creating more opportunities.
Exactly, that's spot on. Like, I guess that's exactly what I was trying to represent as well, Mark. Is that I'm very bullish with the future of our industry, just in that sense that AI is never going to be able to be in a position where it's creating and managing, right? AI is not going to manage or reinforce AI. It's kind of like the rule of AI, don't let the machines run themselves, right? So we'll always have that human component there. And so
too many bad movies about that, too many good movies, bad endings about that scenario. But yeah, go ahead.
No, fair. That's my point. Yep.
Adam, you're going to jump in. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no doubt the market trends forecast that multilingual services will only grow in the future. And like you said, Mark, there are going to be huge opportunities for post-creation as generative AI gives us opportunities to at once create content, test bed it, and optimize, for whoever your audience may be. I think at this stage of the market, GlobalStep is trying to be responsible in terms of its policies and governance, and we actually try to work with partners or prospective clients on a basis of what can they do now with Are LLMs applicable for their content domains now? What is the cost benefit to implementing an LLM? And that usually just is not limited to just translation. So we find ourselves in a dialogue, which also involves, to a certain extent, how we can optimize for costs. But the key thing we want our customers to understand is that there's a cost to quality and a cost to value relationship between the technology and how good the output is that will ultimately be judged by the users, or in our case, the players. So we want to be very cautious with that and go step by step. So I think there are incremental steps to where both Kincaid and Centific are, as well as what you're proposing, expanded kind of post-creation with target market testbed feedback loops.
Some of the visions that I have of the industry doesn't necessarily represent what Centific is pursuing and doing, right? As I'm saying that, hey, I think generative AI is going to come in and displace things. That's just a personal opinion that I have. The things that we're really producing today is around the transcreational aspects of what I mentioned. That's a service that's provided. We're doing the memoQ, so we have the quality estimation. We're doing term extraction. We're doing these things, but again, I just want to clarify that when I make those statements, it's not necessarily what the company's pursuing 100% along the way, just to make sure I'm not misunderstood.
I think that's everyone's trying to look at the future and understand what this will bring to the translation industry, to the language services industry, and at the same time, people are faced with how is this right now here, regardless of what the future may bring.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into some specific use cases. Adam, why don't you start off with something like that you guys have implemented that is really cool and that has helped your customer? You can name the customer or not, but it would be nice if you could walk us through what problem you solved and how you did it. What was the end result?
Some of the use cases that we've been running are actually in the combination of human translation and leveraging machine translation, in particular LLM's capabilities to generate either colloquialisms or slightly different flavored target language. So how this manifests itself is, if we leverage machine translation plugin within memoQ, for example, our translators can...
I'm joking. Okay, go ahead.
I can talk it out, but I think, forget it. So we've been looking at memoQ and the plugins that are available through the MT hubs. And as it turns out, this configuration of tools really allows the translator to select a target string. So there may be multiple options out there, especially when you're looking at transcreation for games or entertainment content, where almost similarly to art modeling, you would actually look at the output of different engines and ask for different flavors. Now, an LLM allows you to ask for even more defined target language flavor, where you could actually select a specific sub-territory within Latin America for a certain, American version. So you may be looking at markets and trying to find just that right hook line for a voiceover audio string. And that's where some of the generative AI aspects of the machine translation are coming in very useful as enhanced localization. But this is not strictly MT. So I'd say that is one of the concrete use cases we've seen within traditional CAT tools, leveraging LLMs.
Excellent. Kincaid, you got any examples?
Yeah, I would say the number one trend that we're seeing right now is memoQ, so quality estimation. Try to optimize the post editing. It seems like, and I want to circle back to a point that Adam made earlier. With the introduction of, say, ChatGPT 4 or ChatGPT 3.5 or ChatGPT, generally speaking, a lot of boards, a lot of managers started asking their organizations to begin to leverage AI. Okay. And with that, we actually found a mass adoption of MT over the past year and a half. And it's pretty interesting because, again, it's like, hey, what's something that exists so I can check my AI box that's been around for 10 plus years? And we saw so many customers. Actually, I maybe mentioned this, but at Taos, there was 4 or 5 big tech companies, as well as a few others on a stage. And they all openly shared that 90% of their spend is going through machine translation or neural machine translation plus post editing. which I thought was fascinating. So for me, again, been back to the company about 4 months now. That's the number one trend I'm seeing, and that's the number one solution we're deploying is optimizing post editing through the quality estimation. But in addition to that, what we've been deploying are chatbots. So this is pretty interesting. And this isn't necessarily just for our internal resources. This is for other LSPs via our customer, is we've been able to make kind of co-pilots, for lack of a better word, to live within a customer's TMS or within their general systems of reference. And so when anyone's doing post editing, when they're doing traditional localization translation, we're actually taking all of the customer's data and reference materials and everything that we know about the customer to create a streamlined approach leveraging LLMs to kind of facilitate the translation process, generally speaking. So those are the two most, which is. Yeah.
Can you go a little further with that and give some specific examples of how you're streamlining the process? What exactly are you doing? I mean, I get the quality estimation on the MT, but what else?
So for the chatbot specifically, imagine being able to take the customer's style guides, reference materials, glossary, things of that nature, where sometimes it could be, say, 20 pages in a document. Today, how does, if there is a translator that has a question, traditionally how's that process go? They read the documentation, they reach out to a PM, they have to search for an answer. That takes time. If you can actually have an assistant, a co-pilot that has all of that information readily available, what can you do? You can eliminate that time variable from the localization process and actually improving turnaround times drastically. So that's the simplicity, I guess you could say, of the solution. And that is also an extension of post editing as well as traditional log. The third use case, and this is the one that's most surprising, I think that's why I'm so bullish, is around the generative content for transcreation. So working with marketing organizations that are saying, hey, our budgets are being drastically reduced. What can we do to bypass localization, leverage generative LLMs to produce content and go into post editing, or again, at least speed things up 40, 50% and reduce costs by 40 to 50%. And the way that we've done that, and as I've mentioned, we first work with the customer, we're able to ingest any of those reference materials. For me, and again, I think it's important to note, we don't prefer that you would take, say, like a TM, for instance, and implement that into the LLM as training data, because the TM is going to represent, in some cases, 10 years of historical translations, right? If you're like a Ferrari, that's going to be valuable because your messaging, everything is going to be very consistent, probably from now to the end of time. Your customer base is never going to change, right? There's a very specific buyer. But like if in maybe working with like a Meta or, a big tech company where their consumer base adapts over time, or a social media company, they need the freedom. And so when you're training these language models, you need them to be quite creative. So if you give them the constraints of, say, TM, what you'll find is the content being produced is simply just going to reference those historical translations as well. And through our research and through our pilots and trial and error, we found by eliminating that as a variable, the LLMs they perform quite well. So just wrapping that up, the generative component of being able to generate content in market and language with the context of intent is probably the leading request that I've been seeing over the past couple of months.
Thanks for that. Hey, Adam, I got to ask you. You guys are really active in the game localization space. Do you provide any services for in-game chat, for example? Do you support that?
So we provide services around testing of all sorts of features, where in games which may have in-game chat, from MMOs to competitive role-playing games, and we also provide mobile development, and we do code development on games as well in that context.
Okay,
but for a specific reason that you're interested in chat.
Well, yeah, because you have players from all around the world using in-game chat and communicating in each other's language. So using various different MT tools. And I just was curious if you had any exposure to that. And in terms of like how LLMs and or MT was facilitating that. Because, for example, you could be here in the US and playing a game with people in Japan and in the Middle East, and we're able to communicate with each other through these kind of in-game chat MT engines. And so, I'm just curious, how that is evolving?
Well, so based on my layman's understanding of how these applications are working, and my understanding is that most in-game chat auto translation tools that you might have for live chat translation are usually based on neural machine translation engines, but that's mostly by virtue of the legacy of that technology being based on MT. Where this will go with LLMs, I think, really depends on what is how optimal are LLMs for live and real-time translation processing, how accurate they are for those target language players, for example, in a game, and how far they may stray from enabling effective and targeted communication. So far, the penetration of live real-time translation chat programs has not been extensive. I think Machine Zone has had a standout example of leveraging that kind of technology for some of their mobile games, and we're certainly familiar with that, doing mobile development. But I think that I couldn't answer you in a determinate fashion whether LLMs will be applied to chat at this stage.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you'd seen that. I mean, if you have but Kincaid,
I
you
just want to ask you a
Sorry.
quick question. So with everything you mentioned, are you seeing any demand, say, for moderation? Going into game chat, I'm assuming that's like an applicable service for these companies. Is that something you see as a services provider of where they require moderation services where you come in and assess things that have been said in those languages? Or are you seeing any demand potentially to leverage LLMs to do, automatic detection of intent or, just the conversations in general?
So, LLMs are being used in every sector with varying levels of penetration. We've talked about localization. I've talked a little about LQA, in which we're starting to see inroads in use cases with QA checks in particular. And now you're asking about the blending of, say, customer support over into community feedback. I definitely think that there is a role to play there. MT has played a huge role in customer support enablement, whether it's, again, real-time chat translation programs that are enabling customer agents to chat with target language players, or a large corpus of customer service data. When it comes to harvesting the data, I think that there are actually a lot of opportunities to optimize content with player feedback, whether it's coming through channels of localization bugs, community, test beds of the sorts that Mark spoke of in the future. I think what we've seen is we get occasionally, because we run large customer support teams, that through which content issues are reported. It is CS provides kind of a third level of editorial feedback on the content base by virtue of the defects that are reported. Similarly to a localization team, which is really providing a second edit pass on source content. When you leverage both the feedback from players and localization teams on your source or your target content, there are always opportunities to ask an LLM and go and correct these features across correct text across a corpus of material. LLMs are very effective at taking actions, as we've discussed previously, right? You can actually ask them to take an action on a text, and that's not a stored procedure. It's actually something that's fairly malleable, and you can talk to the engine as if you were talking to a child in terms of which actions you want it to do. That may vary from if you get reports from customer support or community that there may be gender-biased content. That is something that could be corrected. Or if there are age or sensitive or even more prominently geopolitical issues emerging within product or game communities. These are definitely areas that are addressable. through LLMs being able to take action on the feedback that's being provided, if that makes sense.
It's actually, what queued up this question was, I was talking to a solution engineer at NCSoft, one of the largest gaming companies in South Korea, and their in-game chat engine actually, I asked them about these geopolitical issues. Like, for example, do you call it the EC? That's the Korean preferred name for the body of water that sits between Japan and Korea. And the Japanese historically call it the Sea of Japan. It's very contentious. There's also some islands out there with different names and claims of ownership. Very, very contentious. And I asked them how they handle this. And they said, if somebody says East Sea, we translate it as East Sea. And we do that because if you're the kind of person that wants to use that language, we want you to have the freedom to express yourself in the manner that you intend to express yourself. And I thought that was a kind of an enlightened, potentially troublesome approach. You could get you into some hot water with the Korean public, for example, or with maybe some government agencies who have kind of heavy-handedly come in before and encouraged organizations to adopt certain terminology. But that was their approach, and I thought that's pretty cool. And yeah, so that's what prompted this whole question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic because there's actually some overlap between the way that terminology glossaries would function to align consistency within text or a body of content. To the way that filters have traditionally been used for chat in terms of making sure either that some content is blocked out or removed and it's exclusion lists, redirecting the way that content would appear between two players that are speaking two different languages so that it's not geopolitically or sensitive content.
Yeah, interesting. And I don't know if there will ever be a conclusive answer, but there's just different approaches to it. Let me ask you this. I think earlier in this, when we first kicked off, Kincaid, you were saying that at Centific, you leverage some of the commercially available tools, ChatGPT-4, for example, and some of the others, but you also use some open source tools and kind of bring them in-house and customize them. And that's one approach. Adam, does GlobalStep do that as well? Or are you developing your own iterations of these tools and platforms? Or are you just buying off the shelf?
So we have compared what's available in current CAT tool frameworks to standalone LLMs, and I think as you know right now, within memoQ, I believe that ChatGPT is still the only LLM. MT service provider. No doubt there will be more in the future. In terms of our testing on different use cases, we have jumped into the standalone tools, whether it's Bard, Lambda, or ChatGPT to compare the output. And there are definitely dramatic differences that we're seeing in the quality, but that also reflects how those engines are trained differently. But we're also seeing that the accessibility to those tools is not unilaterally available in each country, for example. So that when you're commanding large teams or when you're leading large teams of translators in different territories, accessibility, for example, to Bard is not universal in every country at this time. So there are limitations there for implementation, and there are differences, dramatic differences in the content quality output. Nevertheless, things are centered around ChatGPT.
Okay. So your approach is like, let's look for the best tool that's available and we'll adopt that and maybe customize it a bit. Whereas Centific is sometimes you're taking open source tools and developing them in-house. Let's move on here for a second. I got to ask you guys, because I think you have fascinating jobs and when you go and engage with a customer, again, you're trying to solve a problem, right? So if you go in and you start talking about AI, maybe that's not really talking about what they need. They want that outcome for that second set of customers that you're talking about, Kincaid, especially. But whether it's the first subset or the second subset, Kincaid, how do you start a conversation? How do you engage with your customers to kind of figure out what they want, and then what does the conversation go like?
Yeah, first, of course, with any sale, it's understanding a problem statement or a need. all the customer engagements I've been involved in the past several months, it's very apparent that there's a cost factor, there's a quality factor. They're looking to expand the team, right? There's a driving component of them looking to achieve something differently that they're not able today. The benefit of AI being so prominent in the news and being talked about at every company is, are you open to leveraging AI or LLMs to solve these problems, right? Just simply asking. And then from there, general feedback is yes or yes with exceptions. These are the guidelines that have been sent down to us as it relates to us looking at LLMs. Maybe that organization leverages, say, ChatGPT or another commercial model, or they have the data questions of like, yes, we'd like to, but we have concerns about, how our data is potentially, uploaded to the internet, for instance. And then once we're able to more or less assess that landscape of any internal guidelines that they have, that's when we get into a solutioning conversation. So again, it's the traditional localization sales cycle of what problem do you have? We're going to solve it with our service, but now we have this product layer and this menu, if you will, of some of the services that I'd mentioned, and just starting there, because once we start developing or refining a model for the customer, the great thing is it can do multiple things. So we're not going to have a model exclusively for MTQE. Of course we could, but why not leverage all that data and reference materials and now deploy these chatbots, or leverage all of this historical data as well to start doing the generative content. So I'm finding even if it's just one particular team that has a need and we can start having that conversation, and we show success, of course, then we quickly get those referrals to expand the AI conversation internal to that organization.
And does it ever happen that you're talking with a customer and they're presenting a problem and you don't actually have the solution, but then you can go back to your team and say, hey guys, how can we fix this problem?
All the time. I had a call this morning, and again, for me, my role, I sell, but I solution with the customer. I'm not an engineer. So a lot of it is, hey, I think we can solve this problem based on the specific needs you have and the tools that are available, but I know maybe we haven't done it yet. So it's going back to the team and saying, hey, based on the data that we have, based on the data the customer has and these restraints, can we deploy an LLM in this environment? For instance, like, again, that's what kind of led us to building a framework, which allows us to truly take any LLM that the customer is potentially using and plug it in. So now we have this data pipeline to more or less deploy our solutions over the top of any LLM. But anyways, that's the short of it is, Mark, absolutely, that happens all the time. It's not as easy as plug and play. It's a lot of on the fly whiteboarding sessions, problem solving, coming back with a team, doing POCs. A lot of these are very specialized to very specific customers, where it's not just off the shelf solutions, right, to solve these problems.
No, and for me, and I'm sure it's the same for both of you, that's just a much more rewarding experience because you're actually problem solving together, and you're not like, here's my pen, please buy it. It's just like you're just solving problems, which is it's rewarding and it's fun, it's challenging and all that. Let's take it to the personal level for a second. Do you ever catch yourself doing something and then saying, why can't I just have ChatGPT do this or some other platform? And if so, give me an example. Adam, put you on the spot here.
I have actually started using ChatGPT for both personal and professional experimentation purposes. Some of it might look like I want to write a note of appreciation for an old friend or for graduation, and I just can't seem to I can piece the feelings together, but I can't, actually writing out the text takes some time. So what I can do is I can actually instruct the LLM to say, write me a nice letter with these elements. Right. And I can use that as a basis for then, speeding up my own execution of what I want to get done. I think in the professional realm, I look at opportunities for adjusting my own narrative and focusing my communication, and looking at how LLMs would organize a set of information that could be useful alternatives to my own. But beyond that, I hesitate to actually use LLMs, for example, for implementation on any written content, because one of the first elements of governance and our MT policies actually to ask clients, do you allow the use of LLMs? I mean, this is just kind of becoming one of the common status quo scoping and operational responsibility questions that one has to ask at the outset of a project, or even within contractual discussions when you're executing a contract before you even begin work. It's a good idea to talk about that if that's possibly on the table.
Awesome. Great examples. And Kincaid?
Yeah, just to echo Adam's point, that is the fundamental conversation. The part I left out earlier, Mark, is, hey, can we leverage your data to train AI and LLMs for your benefit? And you can rest assured that it's not going to be cross-pollinating our other customers' content, right? It's such a relevant conversation these days. But yeah, I've been experimenting with LLMs for quite some time now personally. I've went on to, we all have these crazy ideas on a weekend, like come up with a business idea. Let me see if I can make an MVP and kind of go live, right? And when ChatGPT came out, I got into deploying like an auto GPT agent. And so imagine like a local version of like an interface that connects in with, say, your ChatGPT API, and then connecting that in with a Google API. And you can actually sequence like research topics like, hey, I want to start this company, how would I go about doing it? And then can you pull in like the top 10 most successful companies within this realm, aggregate all the data and kind of like reverse engineer a problem. That's very general. Or another application I've used it for is I wanted to create like a Twitter news company. I was bored I was like, with LLMs, we should be able to automate all this research. So went into a Feedly, right? Feedly, for the listeners out there, if you're not familiar, it's a platform that allows you to aggregate, say, news and social media, and then it's like a decked out RSS feed. Okay, so it allows you to see trending news of various topics. So we could put in ChatGPT or LLMs, and on a daily basis, it's going to give you more or less an updated report of the just trending news. Well, then from there, I took all of that data and I put it into, say, an Airtable, which is very similar to an Excel. And then I have all the content from the articles, which I've now extracted, and I send it back into, say, ChatGPT, and I want it summarized, in 100 characters. And then I built that into a Twitter bot to then start automating a news bot that's completely automated just based on, the fundamental capabilities of LLM. So that's my nerdy way of like having fun.
And how many followers do you have on that?
No, actually, so I did this for a previous venture when I was in the Web3 crypto space. I think we had about 10,000 is what we had the company up to before crypto, kind of went down a little bit and I ended up exiting that company.
Bitcoin's at $30,000 today.
It's changing every day. But, the point is, I was just looking for creative ways of solving problems. And it was a really fun tool to use. Of course, I use it for writing, generally speaking. If I'm at a loss of like for the creative elements of writing, it's not necessarily for like proposals, but sometimes you just can't think of like how to formulate a thought, and you'll go ahead and enter that in chat. Hey, can you give me your feedback? How's this coming across? You know what I mean? Or what's a different way I can make this statement? So general things like that. But then work-wise, I try to avoid it because I'm one of those types of guys that if I'm able to solve problems too easily, then I'll look to kind of automate the things that I do all the time. And I'm trying to avoid that. And I want to keep it as human as possible, but definitely use it for some of the creative elements that I'm involved in on the daily basis.
Yeah.
For future uses, what I really need to do is to start leveraging LLMs for better recipes and better cooking.
Exactly. That's a great idea.
For my family. They have such a fickle palate that if I enter their palate and give some instructions to the LLM, it will come out with a better recipe than I will.
That's awesome. It's funny because I always have thought as these tools as stuff give me output in terms of, hey, write this or do this. Another approach that I've seen that I thought was quite novel was somebody was preparing for an interview, job interview, and they said, what are the questions that I'm going to be asked? And then another person was going to be interviewed by a reporter, and they did the same thing just to kind of mentally kind of get things warmed up. And I think there's a lot of different applications of kind of reversing it and asking the tool, what should I expect, and ask me questions. But I mean, it's the same thing essentially, but it's just kind of a different approach. But I'm like on a daily basis now, kind of like catch myself doing something and saying like, can I just have the model do it? And then at the same point, tipped back to, I think both of you guys kind of touched on this, that if I can do it myself, maybe I should do it myself, because there's this principle that every time you create a tool, the corresponding human, whether it's physical capability or mental capability, degrades. Because the tool does what you're supposed to be doing, so you're not exercising that anymore. And I'm like, do I really want to lose my writing skills?
Totally.
You touched on something that I think is really important, and you touched on it early on, and then you just came back to it. No, then that's on the idea of security, data protection, and all that. So let me ask you both: what are if I'm a potential customer or buyer or user of these tools at the enterprise level, what should I be concerned with? What questions should I be asking?
So I'll take the first stab at that. So content security is extremely important. To start off, as we discussed earlier, not using the free or paid accessible public versions of MTN, because data security, you don't want your content shared between tool sets or content repositories that are not IP protected. Within the specific environment of localization CAT tools, there are some important features to disable when you enable LLM plugin through natively or through a hub, and one of those is your own feature to not share translation memory or glossary content in the execution of storing content and glossaries at the plugin or within a memoQ standalone or TMS system. So educating or informing, I should say, our clients on our own policies and governance goes down into the features that would disallow any sharing of content that's IP sensitive. And that extends into using dedicated paid engines for LLMs, as well as training those.
Great advice, Kincaid.
Yeah, I agree with everything Adam just mentioned. And then again, just on the LLM topic, the way that we've been tackling that is by hosting the LLMs locally. So if the customer has a tenant, say they're using AWS or Azure, et cetera, we can deploy those LLMs on their side, or we can host them on ours. And just having a best practice around the way that data is stored, as well as the way that these models are trained. And then showing the human element via reinforcement learning, via human feedback, like who has access to our data, who's involved from a post-editing standpoint, if it's traditional localization, or in the sense of our AI and data practice, kind of showing that data journey of how it goes to the crowd, how we have a secure platform that they log into, how we're monitoring every single engagement. There are no screenshots, you know what I mean? Everything you can imagine, and then being able to fundamentally bring that back in as training data. That's the number one conversation I have, honestly, on a daily basis when talking about the solutions is, what's that journey look like for my data? Yeah.
Awesome. Let me ask you last question here. There's this space is moving so rapidly in so many different directions. Aside from Feedly, what are some of the key resources to kind of keep abreast of industry developments, and who do you look towards for that purpose?
On my side, Sergio, he's my head of R&D. He's my number one source of information. No, but honestly, it's okay. Jokes aside, I've been blessed to work with some truly brilliant people in the AI space. As I mentioned, the company's been around for quite some time, where we've had the opportunity of building out practices. And I'm in a position where I have a lot of information that's provided to me on a daily basis, where we're sharing news articles and things of that nature. But Feedly, personally, that's the number one source for me. Funny enough, social media, as of recent, for more of the commercial tools, people on TikTok or Instagram, they'll come across a new cool tool for marketing or like nutrition. I know you're a big biking guy, right, Mark? So imagine being able to have a reference to like, hey, how can I structure my diet when I'm training to, do this right, et cetera. So for me, it's really social media, Feedly, and then my internal
it's really
resources.
It's either more beer or less beer, but anyway, go back.
In terms of research entities, I'm focused a lot on the localization and language services industry. So obviously, NIMSY Research, as well as Slater, provide outstanding, research data on the market, where it's going. In terms of games, there are a whole number of other periodic and magazines and research sites that I look at, any CSA research to Newzoo, as well as staying up on localization through Multilingual Magazine.
Yeah.
So there's a lot published from different vantage points, and it's all very useful, is what I will say. Not yet unified, but it's all very useful.
I think that those are all good resources. I'm surprised that neither one of you mentioned that the Seattle Localization Users Group, SLUG, has some amazing panel discussions.
SLUG's phenomenal.
For the listeners who don't get it, it's inside joke. Kincaid and Adam, as along with a couple other industry experts, recently were on a panel discussion at SLUG. So and I think we're going to have part 2 in maybe early next year, right? I think okay, last question is, do you have any announcements, upcoming things that you want to share? And, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? And let's start with Adam and then go to Kincaid, and then we'll wrap this up.
Well, anybody can reach me anytime on LinkedIn, or you can send us an email at info@globalstep.com, and we'll be glad to answer any of your questions on our LOC, LQA, QA, CS, or MT services, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome.
Yeah, Kincaid.day@Centific.com is the easiest way to get in touch with me. Of course, you can always reach out via LinkedIn. We do have some really cool things. I can't quite announce today, but keep your eyes peeled.
Oh, man.
But I will say that we're going to have some really intriguing PR announcements coming out over the next couple of months. Look forward to sharing what we're doing with our customers publicly. But it's really reflecting some of the topics that I brought up today around some very interesting use cases with LLMs, as well as the things that we're doing on the AI and data space. But again, if you're curious in learning more about AI and data solutions, localization generally speaking, or just LLM AI best practices, feel free to reach out. And thanks again, Mark, for hosting us today. Appreciate it.
You guys, Kincaid, Adam, I really appreciate you guys coming on here. And, I've learned a lot. I took a page of notes. And I always say that if I can have a meeting, I learn one thing. I'm happy. I learned a bunch of stuff from you guys today. Thank you so much for being on memoQ Talks.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.